For this week's episode, we're going to crack open from the Family Strange As It Seems archives this folder on bears and bust another myth conception while we're at it, proving that bears don't hibernate. Strange as it seems. Welcome back. I'm Jeff Hicks, curator of the Strange As It Seems archives and grandnephew of John Hicks, who created Strange As It Seems back in the late 1920s. What differentiated Strange As It Seems from Ripley's and the other comic strips of the genre were that we kept the receipts, literally, folders packed with proof for every bizarre fact that was published to prove that it actually happened. So bear with me for the next few minutes while we take a deep dive into this folder on bears. And the oldest mention of bears I can find in the Strange As It Seems archives is this one from February 28th of 1932. A grizzly weighing 1,200 pounds, which at the time was the largest on record, was shot in Alaska and now in the American Museum of Natural History. And several articles here with the largest grizzly bear ever discovered at the time. You ever wonder why bears never look sad? It's because when they have a problem, they just grin and bear it. An interesting story behind the largest grizzly ever found. Apparently in 1976, a hunter in Alaska stumbled across some bones partially frozen in moss and the overflow ice. He took it home, cleaned it, and stored it in his attic for 30 years. 30 years later, he was remodeling and he took it out and brought it out and scored it. Turns out it was the largest grizzly ever recorded. And of course, the grizzly bear is not even the largest of the brown bears. Here we have, in the 1950s, my grandma Elsie found this mounted Alaska brown bear exhibited at the University of Alaska, which stood 9 feet tall and weighed almost 1,500 pounds, which, verified by this letter, was actually not even the world record brown bear at the time. The skull of the bear on the postcard here, which was sent for proof, extraordinary specimen standing next to this 5'5" woman. But the skull of that bear was only a fraction of an inch smaller than the world record brown bear, the skin of which is also displayed at the University of Alaska Museum. The world record bear is 11 feet 7 inches tall, was estimated at 1,700 pounds, which was a bear shot at Cold Bay, Alaska by Bob Reeve. And here's the newspaper article showing Bob Reeve and his world record brown bear. But as many of you know, the largest bear of all, according to the Guinness Book of World Records, is the polar bear, which was featured many times in the Strange As It Seems comic strips. Going back to 1937, May 16th, polar bears can swim 7 miles an hour, about twice as fast as a man, which my grandma Elsie picked up again in the 1950s. She liked the fact so much. But later in 1937, John Hicks shows how when danger threatens, a polar bear cub is towed to safety, holding onto its mother's tail with its teeth. Also, polar bears do not swim with their hind legs. In fact, they use them more as a rudder and paddle with their front legs only. Extraordinary. And a polar bear never really gets wet. Glands in the skin keep its fur covered in oil. What's smarter than the average bear? About half of all bears. Another interesting fact about polar bears is that they're technically black. Under all that white fur, a polar bear's skin is black, which helps it absorb heat from the sun up in the Arctic. Another one from the 1950s, a favorite pastime of the polar bear is to seize its hind toes with its forefeet and roll over and over in the water, like a revolving cask. And the final one from the 1950s, I think Grandma Elsie had an idea that bears don't hibernate because she says, unlike other bears, polar bears that live continually in the rigorous north climate do not lapse into a deep sleep. Notice that she didn't say hibernate because she probably knew at this point, like all the Hickses did, that bears don't hibernate. That's still coming. But there are also amazing facts and stories about bears interacting with humans or vice versa. This going back to 1937, quite amazing amount of material in here corroborating this fact. But 1937, where the spectators are caged and the animals roam loose at the Canyon Bear feeding grounds at Yellowstone National Park, the human audience is fenced in while the bears are permitted to wander at large. And an amazing amount of material in the archives corroborating this one. We have the visitors approaching the enclosure where the humans were kept inside. We have the humans inside looking at the bears. Of course, here is the view of the humans watching the bears feed, and then a close-up of the grizzly bears feeding. And a letter from the United States Department of the Interior, National Park Service, Yellowstone National Park from 1936. Here is a sketch, actually, of the entire apparatus of the human beings behind the enclosure and the bears roaming free. And then my grandma Elsie writes a letter in the 1940s to thinking about potentially showing this again, but the fenced-in area to which you refer that was located on Otter Creek was discontinued in 1941 as a bear feeding ground and show. There are no places in this national park now where such a program is presented, and the physical evidences of such structures have been obliterated. And in the same letter, in answer to your question concerning the information which you read about bears putting their rear foot into the track of their forefoot so that the tracks appear to be those of bipeds, is apparently erroneous, which is why it didn't show up in the Strange as It Seems archives. For in our observations of bears and bear tracks, there are definitely footprints of the left feet when the bear walks. We're enclosing small sketches to show the relative positions of the tracks of both the black and grizzly bear, which will give you some idea of the manner in which they appear in the dust, mud, or snow after a bear has passed through an area. And here we have from National Park Service from Yellowstone, we have the grizzly bear and the black bear paw prints. What did the teddy bear say after he finished dinner? I'm stuffed. And more correspondence, this with the American Museum of Natural History, New York from 1940. Apparently arthritis was rather uncommon, but this 1,500-pound Alaskan brown bear was discovered with arthritis. And this from the 1950s from the city of Rochester, Minnesota. Apparently there was a watermelon eating contest once at the Rochester, Minneapolis Zoo between a cub bear and Sally Emmett. The bear won. A bear walks into a bar and says, "I'll have a gin and tonic." The bartender says, "Why the big paws?" The bear says, "Well, I was born with them." And this from 1940, that was published in the Strange as It Seems comic strip in the 1950s. We have of the provisions of a contract covering the sale of a garage in Pittsburgh, Kansas. It specified in the contract that 2 brown bears hibernating in a wash rack were not to be disturbed until spring. We have a letter from Guy Van Scherlitz, the lawyer from Pittsburgh, Kansas, proving it. And apparently in the late 1940s, the city of Duluth, Minnesota, with corroboration from the Duluth Chamber of Commerce here, that the streets of Duluth, a city of over 100,000 in population at the time, are visited by 50 to 100 wild bears every year. And here's the story of a bear who entered the home of Jean Sullivan. I love this one because she actually wrote back on a letter that was sent by my grandfather, Ernest. She returned the letter, which I now have the original, along with her handwritten note, corroborating that not only did the bear raid the pantry, it carried the mattress and bedding outside and hung the curtains on the back fence. And some more proof from the 1950s from the Society of the Zoological in Philadelphia about Bolivar, the huge Siberian bear at the Philadelphia Zoo, who pulled a disappearing act today that gave his keeper a bad start. Keeper Stuart Borden, in making his rounds, peered into the pit where Bolivar lives and promptly did a double take. The huge beast was nowhere in sight. Bolivar couldn't climb out, the gate to the pit was locked, and the door to his sleeping den was shut. Where was he? Hastening around to the sleeping den, Borden pulled open the door, and there inside was a drowsy, protesting bear. That accounted for Bolivar, all right, but how did he get shut in his den? Borden thought another zoo employee might have done it, but they all denied it. Mystified, the keeper gave Bolivar his food and then stood watch to see what might happen. After finishing his dinner, the big bear went straight back to his bedroom, curled up inside, then calmly reached over with a huge paw and pushed the door shut. No icy blast for him. Bolivar had enough of cold, and spring should be on its way. And in addition to the bear constellation being the oldest in human history, in fact, Ursa Major, the Great Bear, is one of the earliest documented constellations. dates back over 10,000 years in indigenous North American and Eurasian traditions. But this fact by John Hicks, discovered in Mystery, Magic, and Medicine, a book by Howard Haggard from the late 1800s. In ancient times, it was believed that eating the fat of a bear was an effective treatment for baldness, since the bear was such a hairy animal. Ever wonder how a bear catches fish without using a fishing rod? He uses his bare hands. And this extremely rare, interestingly enough, occurrence documented by several letters from the Lewis and Clark National Forest in the northern region of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, triplet grizzly bears reported in 1939 in Montana. And another interesting fact discovered by my grandma Elsie in this Chicago National History Museum bulletin, there are 77 different species of brown bear in North America. And while I've encountered grizzly bears myself many times, backpacking and fly fishing in the mountains of Montana, all around Yellowstone National Park, I don't have quite so many photographs because most of the time I don't stick around long enough to snap a photo. But one of the facts featured in the 1950s by my grandma Elsie, everyone in Montana knows, this was actually backed up by the January-February 1937 Yellowstone Nature Notes from the United States Department of the Interior National Park Service, that grizzly bears are not slow. In fact, they've been clocked running at about 30 miles an hour, which is faster than Usain Bolt, which at the bottom of this, as everyone knows, in view of this, it will be seen how absurd it is for any man to think that he may escape from a grizzly by simply running. And in one of the most extraordinary stories I've ever come across of bear-human interaction is the story of Voytech, a Syrian brown bear who was adopted by the 2nd Polish Corps during World War II. As a young cub, his mother was shot by hunters, and he was found in the mountains of Iran by a young boy. The young boy sold him to a group of Polish soldiers traveling through. Apparently one of the civilian refugees, an 18-year-old girl who is the great niece of a Polish general, convinced the lieutenant to buy the bear. And the bear learned to copy the soldiers, even as going as far as drinking beer, smoking, marching alongside. He would even salute. And in Egypt, the 2nd Polish Corps was reassigned to fight alongside the British 8th Army in the Italian campaign. However, the regulations for the British transport ship forbade mascots or pets, so Voytech was officially drafted into the Polish army as a private, and he was listed among the soldiers of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company. And during the Battle of Monte Cassino, he helped the unit, carrying 100-pound crates of 25-pound artillery shells, never dropping any of them. He carried boxes that usually required 4 men, and he even learned by copying the soldiers to stack them in trucks. And for his service in the battle, he was promoted to the rank of corporal. And Voytech spent his last years, his remaining years, at the Edinburgh Zoo, where he was often visited by members of the Polish company, and he would recognize them. They would throw him cigarettes and drink beer with him. And in his honor, to this day, the official emblem of the 22nd is a bear. What color socks do bears wear? None. They usually have bare feet. And at last we come to the myth conception published by my grandma Elsie in 1957 that bears do not hibernate, which apparently caused quite a stir. We have a letter here handwritten on notebook paper by Peggy Betts. Will you please send me further information about the article about bears do not hibernate? Please return soon, as I'd like to have it in science. And here we have Susan Harmon, also handwritten on notebook paper. We have a problem in school about bears do not hibernate and what hibernate means. Well, the Webster's Dictionary agrees with you on what hibernate means. To put it clearly, some dictionaries say hibernate just means sleep, but Webster says a torpid sleep. We would like to know where you found that bears do not hibernate, plus where you found what hibernate means. And my grandma took the time in February 21st to write back Miss Susan Harmon. Dear Susan, your letter of January 26th has just reached me. I was very happy to hear from you. My authority for the statement that bears do not hibernate is Dr. Charles P. Lyman of the Museum of Comparative Zoology at Harvard College in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And here we have the letters from Charles Lyman the assistant curator of mammals to which she refers. And she says, I'm quoting from Dr. Lyman's letter as follows. Basically, the question revolves around the definition of the word hibernation. Webster's dictionary is extremely vague. For under one definition, hibernation is simply stated to mean to spend the winter. Obviously, under this definition, all animals and birds, including ourselves, hibernate during the wintertime. But Webster's more narrow definition is to pass the winter in close quarters in a torpid state. Torpid is defined as having lost motion or the power of exertion and feeling. And under this narrow definition, hibernation consists of a state in which the animal appears to be lifeless, is apparently insensible to pain or other stimuli, and is totally incapable of moving about in a normal manner. And at the end, to sum up then, I would say that bears do spend most of the winter in a heavy dormant sleep, which could be called hibernation, but they do not hibernate in the deep torpid manner that is typical of many rodents and some other animals. I hope the above explanation will give you the information that you desire. With best wishes, Elsie Hicks. Well, that about wraps it up for this week's episode. Thanks for bearing with me and bearing down into all of this fascinating material on the world of bears, where we learned that there was once a bear in the Polish army. The bears run faster than Usain Bolt, and contrary to popular opinion, bears do not hibernate. If you enjoy content like this and stories of the strange and unusual, please leave a comment or hit the bell and subscribe. And we'll return next week for another episode of Strange as It Seems.